Hello friends and welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a hot minute. If you are subscribed and you saw my community post, you may know that during the summer I don't have a lot of time to myself where people aren't constantly like walking around and this is pretty much the first time in like almost a month that my parents have actually been out of the house for more than an hour, and I can finally sit down and film something in like a quiet space. And trust me, I have been working hard at my job trying to make enough money or trying to figure out how I can make enough money to move out and be on my own so that way I have a little more control over my space and my schedule. But y'all know the economy right now. Like, it's tough out there if you are trying to rent somewhere, but that is kind of beside the point. I'm just glad to be able to sit down and film Tier 9. This tier has a lot, and I believe Tier 10 has... How many does Tier 10... Yeah, Tier 10 has more movies, which is, like, insane to me. I've seen a few of the movies off of this tier, or I've heard of a few of them, but I'm sure that you did not click on this video to hear my excuses for why I've been gone, so let's just get into Tier 9 of the psychological horror movie Iceberg. Starting off strong, we've got After Life. It's a 2009 movie directed by Agnieszka Wojciechowska. Y'all know that I suck at names from other countries, and I apologize for butchering that. But the film is starring Liam Neeson, Christina Ricci, and Justin Long, which I think this is a really interesting cast to begin with because I love Justin Long. He's such a strange dude. He's in so many movies, and I feel like he always is giving off like nerdy guy vibes, but like he plays these serious roles sometimes, and it always throws me off. Like, I can't take him seriously. But the film follows Christina Ricci's character as she is recently deceased, or somewhat deceased. The film kind of centers around this idea of the afterlife and sort of the in-between place that souls may end up. And Liam Neeson's character is a funeral director and sort of mortician type of guy who is preparing her body for a funeral. And he also claims to sort of have this ability to help people move into the afterlife, and Christina Ricci's character has sort of awoken in the in-between, and so they sort of have communication between the two of them. I think the sort of, scary part about the film is supposed to be that Christina Ricci's character doesn't want to move on, and so she has to sort of fight Liam Neeson's character in order to reach her loved one, Justin Long, and to try to, keep Liam Neeson from sending her off. The next film is The Black String. It's a 2018 film directed by Brian Hansen and starring Frankie Muniz. If you know who Frankie Muniz is, you may know that he had a lot of his main stardom when he was a child, so seeing him as an adult in movies is always really weird and really interesting. This film sort of follows his character after he decides to hook up with a woman that he sees advertising her services, and afterwards he believes that this infection that he has is related to that and a much larger and more sinister plot to harm him. And there's sort of a black magic witchy sort of vibe going on with this sort of paranoia that he's experiencing. I can see why it's on the Iceberg. It definitely looks like more of an indie film, but it does look interesting. I feel like films like this tend to pique my interest just because it sort of flips the script of the paranoid, I've had some sort of encounter and now I think something is after me, or some sort of greater force is at play here, because I feel like, again, we tend to do the women be crazy trope, and so to see a man sort of in the situation of being paranoid about a situation that may seemingly be unrelated is always interesting to me because, like, the things that people will believe in these movies is always very, like, hit or miss. Come Back to Me is a 2014 film directed by Paul Layden, starring Katie Walder and Matt Passmore. This film definitely is more of an indie, sort of lower budget film. You can just tell by the trailer, but it really does look interesting, and it has sort of a basic kind of plot, but as I watched the trailer, I became more interested in what was going on, and I think the part of me that loves Lifetime movies was especially interested because it definitely seemed like a more complex and more interesting sort of Lifetime-esque movie. Basically, after a woman is in a car accident, she suffers from blackouts, and as she is trying to recover from both the blackouts and trying to figure out what's going on there, she starts to become a bit paranoid that something else is going on, that something more is going on, and this one takes place a little bit more in reality, so it's more of a paranoia that someone is in her house and that someone is trying to get her, and that she is like waking up not knowing how she got there and what she was doing, etc. And there's sort of this like neighbor person who he's kind of involved, and she ends up setting up a camera in the evening so that she can see what's going on at night, you know, when she's not awake, and she starts to witness things happening to her and with her in regards to someone being in their house. The Disappointments Room is a 2016 film directed by DJ Caruso and starring Kate Beckinsale, and this is a purely white people be doing this kind of junk where Kate Beckinsale's character is at this house, and it's a rural sort of mansion type of place. It's pretty much this woman's dream home, and she finds all of these keys, and she goes exploring, and she releases an evil presence, you know, into the home by opening these doors. I mean, why? Like, why? I understand it's a rural home, and maybe I know a lot of people do have the dream of having like a little cottage in the woods, and that's cute and all until you release some age-old mysterious evil from the past. Like, please stop doing that. Yeah, pretty basic plot. If you're into the home is haunted sort of films and lady sort of wandering around opening doors she shouldn't be opening, this is for you. Don't Answer the Phone is a 1980 film directed by Robert Hammer, starring Nicholas Worth, James Westmoreland, and Flo Garish. This film is about a man who is a Vietnam War vet, and he decides that he's going to pretty much torment people over the phone. He decides to terrorize women, because why not? Women are already scared enough of men, so let's go ahead and terrorize them some more. But not only does he go out and commit a bunch of crimes in LA, but he also decides to torment a radio psychologist over the phone by describing his crimes. And obviously, anyone in this position would be terrified, but also want to figure out who exactly this is. I wouldn't consider this film to be a slasher necessarily. There's some slasher elements to it, but it's definitely not just gore, gore, gore the way that slashers sort of tend to be. Obviously, there's a psychological element of tormenting your one of your targets, I guess, over the phone, and this is very reminiscent of the time, like of the specifically the 60s and 70s. I know there were a lot of sort of phone crime phone taunting that happened around that time. There's so many true crime stories about people, specifically women, who were taunted over the phone. Don't Blink is a 2014 film directed by Travis Oates, starring Mina Suvari, Brian Austin Green, Joanne Kelly, and Zach Ward. This film has more of an ensemble sort of cast, and knowing the plot, I have some reservations about whether or not having an ensemble is necessarily a good thing. I've watched a few ensemble movies in the past couple of months that I have just really disliked because it was ensemble and there were just too many people talking, and I don't think the writers were well versed in creating interesting and cohesive conversations, but you can always keep up hope. This film is also known as Last Stop. The plot follows a group of people who, when they decide to go on vacation at this sort of remote cabin, they discover that it's actually kind of a scary cabin. Something awful happened there, and it's going to torment them until they figure out what it is. A very, very classic sort of plot in terms of like a horror plot, that something sinister is going to continue to harass you in the location that something bad happened, in order to feel that they get justice in having people know their story. And so a lot of this consists of sort of a paranoia amongst the group while creepy things are happening, whether it's notes sort of written on different things or people, saying things behind other people's backs. It's very much so. There could be paranoia amongst the group already, but even more so now that there is something creepy happening. Haunts is a 1976 film directed by Herb Fried and stars Maybrit and Cameron Mitchell. The film follows Maybrit's character as she believes that her uncle might be the one who is responsible for a number of murders that have been happening in the area. More specifically, it's a murderer who uses scissors. Apparently, the film was inspired by the director's wife's experience after she was in a car accident, and sort of the way that repressed memories work and sort of how that can haunt somebody. House Hunting is a 2012 film directed by Eric Hurt, starring Mark Singer, Art Lafleur, and Haley Dumond. So this film follows two families who are, of course, house hunting, and they decide to stop by a remote open house, and when they do, they discover that there is a girl there who has no tongue, and in trying to figure out what happened to her and what exactly is going on in this house, they realize that they are actually trapped there. And again, this is one of those films. People are trapped in a location. They have to figure out what's going on in order to survive. They're sort of like people turning on each other kind of thing. Very 2012. I Can See You is a 2008 film directed by Graham Resnick, starring Ben Dickinson, Christopher Ford, and Duncan Skiles. The film follows the three young men as they go into the woods to shoot an ad, and when one of their girlfriends goes missing, they, obviously go looking for her. This is one of those films where, again, the characters sort of descend into madness, partially because they are out in the wilderness, but also this sort of idea of turning against each other and just not knowing what's going on. I think this film is a lower budget film, so if you like lower budget films, then I would highly recommend this one. Last Shift is a 2014 film directed by Anthony DiBlasi, starring Juliana Karkavi. The film follows a rookie cop that is essentially tasked with staking out an old police station that is about to be shut down permanently, and of course, as she's staying there overnight, a lot of sinister and scary things start happening. This is one that I believe I've seen pop up multiple times, and I had considered adding to my watch later list, but I just really haven't gotten around to seeing it. It looked really interesting, and that's kind of all that I have to say about it. The Lost is a 2006 film directed by Chris Syvertson and starring Mark Center, Shay Astor, and Alex Frost. It's also inspired by a book by Jack Ketchum. And if you know who Jack Ketchum is, you know that he writes very, I feel like, hard-hitting sort of thriller type of novels that sometimes are based off of real life events. If you know the film The Girl Next Door, this is also another one that is based off of a true story. It is based off of the life and crimes of Charles Schmid, or he was also known as the Pied Piper of Tucson. However, the film centers more around a teenager or a teenage version of him, and it sort of follows both the main character, who goes by Ray Pye, and he is very clearly a sociopathic but also charismatic teen killer, but he is also followed around by a detective who is trying to prove that he has committed these crimes. The Premonition is a 1975 film directed by Robert Allen Schnitzer and stars Sharon Farrell. The film follows a woman who is sort of having these, what they would call premonitions and visions per se, after the biological mother of her foster children decides to stalk them along with her circus clown boyfriend. And that just comes into play in the sense that he looks kind of ridiculous, but it also explains why he looks the way that he looks for parts of the film. But yeah, I can see how this would definitely be like a psychological horror, because not only is she having these visions that make it sort of unclear to her like what is real and what is fake, because she also is enlisting the help of a sort of like psychologist in order to sort of help her, but also she is like legitimately being stalked by these people who want to take back the foster child, and who are actively just mentally and emotionally unhinged people. The Reincarnation of Peter Proud is a 1975 film directed by J. Lee Thompson, starring Michael Sarrazin. And this film it follows Peter Proud, of course, and he starts to have these sort of visions and almost nightmares of some sort of previous life. And as he is drawn to a particular location, he finds that at that location is a woman who he believes to be his earlier or former self's wife. The film is based on a novel of the same name, and I imagine that the novel is like just as terrifying, and it doesn't sound terrifying based on like just simply the synopsis of it, that like, oh, he's just looking for this reincarnation, like he's trying to figure out like what's going on, like is this woman really his former wife or something. But you can see how, even though in itself it doesn't seem scary, if you are someone who is experiencing very vivid and sort of terrifying dreams and visions, that it would actually be very terrifying. And having this draw to a place and this feeling that you know somebody that you like don't know, also sort of sounds terrifying. The Return is a 2003 film directed by Andrei Zvyagintsev. This is a Russian film, so the names are Russian. It stars Vladimir Garin and Ivan Dobronivov. This film is another film where there are children who have a parent who is gone and returns. In this particular story, the children, their father was gone for, most of their life and decides to return. Obviously, something like this would bring on a lot of mixed emotions, and clearly this film goes in sort of a, psychologically horrifying direction, in the sense that they are trying to sort of figure out where he's been and, why he's back and all of these things. So definitely interesting. I believe it won some awards for being like one of the best foreign films of that year. Sublime is a 2007 film directed by Tony Krantz and starring Tom Cavanaugh. This film follows a man who, after he's supposed to get a colonoscopy, he wakes up to find out that he got the wrong operation, that he has to figure out like what exactly is real and fake. This is another one of those ones where you can't really tell like what exactly is real, what's fake. He also spends a lot of time reminiscing about his 40th birthday because there were a lot of sort of sus things and conversations that he had with people about operations and about pretty much like medical malpractice or hospital errors per se. But yeah, there's not much to say about this one. It's guy is confused because something sinister is definitely at play here. He just doesn't know what exactly it is. Wendigo is a 2001 film directed by Larry Fessenden and starring Jake Weber, Patricia Clarkson, and Eric Pursullivan. So the film follows a young boy sort of as he learns about the story and folklore surrounding the Wendigo. And if you don't know what a Wendigo is, it's part of Native American folklore. A Wendigo is essentially a being that can sort of shift between an animal appearance and a human appearance. In this particular movie, it's a half man, half deer. However, in the folklore, it's not necessarily specific as to what the Wendigo will appear as, and even if it does appear as human, it may be sort of an uncanny valley sort of human, that there may be something off about it that's sort of recognizable. But needless to say, if you are interested in seeing a film that is about a Wendigo or about this sort of folklore, then this might be an interesting film. The Passion of Darkly Noon is a 1995 film directed by Philip Ridley, starring Brendan Fraser and Ashley Judd. And for one, I was very surprised to see that Brendan Fraser was in a film of this category because he's America's sweetheart. Like, what's he doing in this kind of movie? But it's about a man who came from an ultra conservative Christian cult, and when his parents pass away, he becomes sort of, I guess, erratic, unhinged, in the sense that he begins wandering around the woods, and when he takes sort of a tumble, he ends up getting saved by a coffin transporter, and this woman, which is Ashley Judd, her mute boyfriend, and the boyfriend's mother. And in all of this, I think part of it is that he's trying to sort of come to terms with what happened to his parents, while also sort of discovering that there's things outside of this religious cult that he was a part of and was around. And so in sort of discovering, a bit of like how the world works outside of that, the way that people are outside of that, there's sort of like a sexual like undertone to a lot of his encounters with like Ashley Judd's character, as well as a bit of like jealousy and things like that going on in there. So definitely interesting, and I'm glad that this came up because I'm kind of interested in seeing this film. Deleter is a 2022 film directed by Mikhail Red, starring Nadine Lustre, and it is a Filipino film. The film follows a woman who is working as someone who deletes and gets rid of sensitive content on the internet. So essentially, she is a content moderator. And when one of her coworkers decides to take her own life, she has to delete the video that her coworker made, while also sort of kind of being this person who within the office is a bit apathetic about her work and is seen as sort of cold and unfazed by what she sees, even though it is very graphic content that she is filtering through, while also knowing and understanding that she is someone who is dealing with a lot of past trauma that sort of leads her to be this cold and unfazed type of person. So there's sort of like the element of, what's going on with, how her job should be affecting her and the way that it's not because of her past trauma. Very interesting concept, and I think that it's, it looks like an interesting film to watch if you are not sensitive to those kinds of subjects. The Corruption of Chris Miller is a 1973 film directed by Juan Antonio Bardem, starring Jean Seberg, Marisol, and Barry Stokes. It's a Spanish film, i.e. from Spain, and it follows this woman and her stepdaughter as they decide to hire this sort of handyman after their husband slash father leaves. And after they hire this handyman, a series of murders begins. And so it's very clear that like something is amiss about this handyman and they're very sus of him. Dream No Evil is a 1970 film directed by John Hayes, starring Brooke Mills and Edmund O'Brien. It follows a young girl who wants to find her birth father and ends up being adopted by a church. However, even as she gets older and gets engaged and seemingly is moving on with her life, she still is obsessed with trying to find her father, which I think, because I'm someone who doesn't know the experience of like this sort of situation, I can't say that it's crazy to continue to want to know who your biological parent or parents are, but hers ends up turning deadly. She ends up kind of going on a rampage. So that's really interesting if you're interested in, female killers. The Forgotten, or also known as Don't Look in the Basement, is a 1973 film directed by S.F. Brownrigg and stars Bill McGee and Rosie Holitic. The film follows a nurse who goes to work at a psychiatric facility that happens to be remote, and as she is working there, she sort of discovers that the patients are going to torment her. They're going to cause her some psychological damage, which I think anyone who's worked in the psychiatric field, more specifically in a place that is like a mental hospital or mental health facility, knows that can definitely happen, but of course in this film it's like taken to the extreme. Killer Nun is a 1979 film directed by Giulio Berruti, starring Anita Ekberg, and this is an Italian film, and it's also known as Nunsploitation, which I think anyone who knows anything about like the word exploitation or like the ending of exploitation at the end of something knows that when it comes to films, it usually means that whatever's in front of it is going to be exploited in some capacity for entertainment. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is a bad thing, but it also usually doesn't mean that it's a good thing. And based on the title Killer Nun, you can sort of infer that this film exploits the Catholic Church in some capacity. And in this particular film, it stars Anita Ekberg, which she is considered to be a Swedish sex symbol of the time. And in this film, she is a nun, and she sort of discovers that she likes to do things that are not considered to be appropriate by the church. Essentially, she finds pleasure in all of the things that people swear off in order to be a nun. So that means like sexual encounters or degradation, using drugs, or just sadism and masochism in general. Any of that kind of stuff, it's what's happening. So if nunsploitation is interesting to you and you want to see a Swedish sex symbol, then Killer Nun's it. Cries in the Night, or also known as Funeral Home, is a 1980 film directed by William Fruet and stars Leslie Donaldson, Kay Hawtrey, and Jack Van Avera. The film follows a woman when she moves to her grandmother's house to help her grandmother turn it into an inn when it formerly was a funeral home. And as they open as an inn, they begin to notice that their guests are turning up missing and or dead. You can guess that something sinister is amiss. Schizoid is a 1980 film directed by David Paulsen, starring Klaus Kinski and Mariana Hill. The film is sort of on the line of being a slasher film because it's about a woman who is an advice columnist, and she, in getting a divorce from her husband, begins receiving threatening notes. And also in her therapy group, she finds that the members are also being stalked and slowly killed off. There's been some criticism of the way that the film depicts violence against women, but honestly, most slashers that the man is the assailant, you could say the same thing, so I won't say that it's like super different than any other slasher film that has violence against women, but this one especially is kind of its time. It was made in 1980, but you know, in the 60s and 70s, there again were so many cases of women who were being threatened over the phone or receiving, you know, threatening notes that nothing could be done about. The next 4 films are Amityville films. I think the person who made this really liked Amityville or is really interested in the Amityville films. The next 4 films are the 1990 film The Amityville Curse, directed by Tom Barry, starring Kim Coates, Cassandra Gava, and Jan Rubis. The next film is Amityville, It's About Time. It's a 1992 film directed by Tony Randall. It is the 6th installment of these films, and it stars Stephen Mocht, Sean Weatherly, and Megan Ward. The 7th installment is Amityville, A New Gen, or New Generation. It's a 1993 film directed by John Merlowski and stars Ross Partridge and Julia Nixon-Soul. And the 8th installment is Amityville Dollhouse. It's a 1996 film directed by Steve White, starring Robin Thomas, Star Andreef, and Alan Cutler. And a lot of these films are direct-to-video, so again, if you are someone who's super interested in Amityville and that sort of universe, then there's a lot of these films that they made because they made a lot of like TV or made-for-TV or just direct-to-video films because they wanted to. There's so much to explore in terms of Amityville. I'm not going to go over each of the individual plots of them because, again, I feel like it's one of those things where, yes, you could watch them individually and they might be interesting, but you could also just be a huge fan of Amityville and that universe. So if that interests you, then like watching any of these without knowing the plot would be interesting in itself, probably. The next film is an Indian film, so I apologize for just mispronouncing probably a good portion of these names. The title of the film is Bhul Bhulaiya. It's a 2007 film, and this one is technically considered to be a comedy horror film, and it is a remake. The film is directed by Priya Darshan. It is an ensemble cast starring Akshay Kumar, Vidya Balan, Shaini Ahuja, and Amisha Patel. Again, I apologize for mispronouncing any of their names, but the film surrounds a man and his wife, and when they decide to move into a home that is supposed to be haunted, they don't heed the warning that it is haunted, and they decide to move in anyway. And when creepy stuff starts to happen, they decide to call someone in order to help them sort of solve the mystery and to get rid of the ghost. And again, I noticed that this was a comedy horror, so if you are interested in those types of films, then I would recommend something like this. It kind of made me wonder why this film is on here, because unless you were looking for a nice little detour in your psychological horror binge, and looking for something a little bit lighter, I'm not really sure why this is on here. And maybe it does have more like psychological elements to it, but from what I understood, it really didn't. But I wouldn't say you shouldn't watch it. I just don't know if it really fits this category. Donkey Punch is a 2008 film directed by Ollie Blackburn, starring Sean. It's spelled Sian. So I don't know if that is Sean or not. Brecken, Nicola Burley, and Jamie or Jaime, depending on who it is, Winstone. Okay, it's Jamie. It's Jamie Winstone. So the film is sort of an ensemble. It's about a group of young people who want to party on their holiday/vacation, and when they do, things sort of go awry. It's sort of hard to explain without explaining the title, because the title is like a big part of like what the plot sort of entails. If you don't know, so Donkey Punch is sort of a sexual myth about it's hard to explain this without being explicit, because but it's a myth about something that you can do to a partner to increase your experience. And in this particular film, I believe that they do that and they end up killing their partner and or like essentially maiming them in doing this, even though the idea of it is supposed to be like a good thing, something that again is supposed to be pleasurable for someone in the act, but can be painful for the other person. Whereas in this case, and sort of a part of the myth is that it could kill somebody. And yeah. Ed Gein, The Butcher of Plainfield, is a 2007 film directed by Michael Pfeiffer and stars Kane Hodder. You can pretty much guess what this film is about and what it is. I don't feel like I need to explain too much. If you know who Ed Gein is, you know, like he's one of the most prolific serial killers in the United States. He was known for a lot of the like horrific acts and things that he did with people's bodies. So this again is just another movie about him. So, The Haunting of Molly Hartley is a 2008 film directed by Mickey Little, starring Haley Bennett, and I've actually seen this film, and it's not that bad. It doesn't look like it's gonna be good, but it actually kind of is, and I was surprised by the end that I was like, okay, that wasn't that bad. The film follows Molly Hartley, and it follows her after she has a traumatic encounter with her mother, where her mother tried to kill her. And so after her mother is sort of taken into a psychiatric ward to recover, she sort of tries to get a new start at a new school. And as she's going to the school, she of course experiences a lot of flashbacks and a lot of just being triggered by the recent experience that she just had, while also there's sort of an element of like something supernatural happening at the same time. And so in her experiencing some of these like supernatural events, she also can't like, people don't really believe her because they think it's just her trauma. But it's sort of hard to tell the difference between her having a traumatic flashback and or being triggered by something, or if it's something supernatural and scary that's happening. Yavaram Nalam is a 2009 film directed by Vikram Kumar and stars R. Madhavan. This is an Indian film, and it's translated to All Are Fine, and it's also known as 13B, Fear Has a New Address. And the film is about a man who moves into a new apartment, and he finds that there's a lot of, like, strange sort of occurrences that are happening, like, things that, like, you would think are just kind of, like, odd. And he also notices that the women in his family, I'm assuming his mother and, like, his sister, and they get hooked on a show called Yavaram Nalam, which is All Are Fine or Everyone is Well, and it starts to spark sort of this questioning of what this show is and why no one is, like, questioning the creepy things that start to happen. Dark Nature is a 2022 film directed by Berkeley Brady, starring Madison Walsh, Hannah Emily Anderson, and Helen Belay. The film follows a therapy group of women who go out into nature, into, the outdoors, the forest, in order to sort of go out and face their traumas in the wilderness and sort of test their ability to survive. I think a lot of people find that there's a relationship between, like, healing and nature, and so in them going to, sort of experience the therapeutic value of nature, they find that it's a lot harder than they think. But not only is there, of course, the element of, like, facing your fears and whatnot, but, like, they actually have something to be afraid of. It becomes really creepy. They just sort of start experiencing these creepy things happening, and that they are potentially being watched by something or someone. And, the forest is a scary place. It's very similar to the ocean. You just don't know what's out there exactly. Like, you could do an entire grid search for days and days and days, and you would still miss stuff. So don't go into the forest alone, kids. Or even with groups, to be honest. Just stick to the trail paths. And don't do anything that would get you hurt. The next film is False Positive. It's a 2021 film directed by John Lee, starring Ilana Glazer, Justin Theroux, and Pierce Brosnan. I've talked about this film before on my channel, and I can't remember. I honestly thought that this was on a different tier before, but maybe not. Maybe I really did just talk about it. I know that I talked about it in my motherhood video, so if you've seen that, you may know what I'm talking about. But False Positive is about a woman who she gets implanted with, she gets IVF, and she gets pregnant, but she ends up having to choose between the children. She ends up having to choose which one that she would want to keep, because if you know anything about pregnancy, especially if you are doing IVF, you know that more than likely if you are doing IVF, you are having difficulties getting pregnant, and so it can be dangerous to have more than one child at the same time, especially if you are already having trouble getting pregnant. And so in this situation, she has to choose between the children. But not only does she have to choose, but she's having some reservations about the doctor and just some weird happenings that are going on that make it sort of eerie, I guess, in her whole pregnancy experience. And so, again, if you're sensitive to pregnancy type of stories, I wouldn't recommend this. But if this interests you, especially seeing Ilana Glazer in a different setting other than being a comedian, this is a really interesting film, and I really liked it. Ooh, this next film looked really interesting to me. It's called She Will. It's a 2021 film directed by Charlotte Colbert, or Colbert, depending on how you pronounce it. It's a UK film, and it stars Alice Cridge. This film looked really interesting to me, especially when the star of a film is an older woman. Anyway, the film is about an aging actress who gets a surgery done, and she decides to take her and her like physical therapist out sort of to this remote area in order to continue therapy, in order to recover. However, when she is out there, she encounters forces and supernatural entities dealing with the witches that were previously burned there. And I don't know. This movie looked so interesting to me, and honestly, seeing that a woman directed it makes it even more interesting to me and makes it make sense to me. I think you have to watch the trailer to like really get a sense of like the foreboding nature of this like remote area that they're in. It's supposed to be in like the Scottish countryside, and the extra element, the other element of there being like the witch's burn and sort of this like haunting nature about it. Very interesting. Atma is a 2013 film directed by Suparan Verma and starring Bipasha Basu, Nawazuddin Siddiqui, and Dorial Dhawan. This is an Indian film, so I probably mispronounced a lot of people's names, but it follows a young mother and her daughter who start to experience the sort of haunting, I guess, of the recently deceased father that the mother didn't really tell her daughter about him being deceased, but they are divorced and just not on very good terms. And so it's sort of believed that the father is kind of haunting them. And obviously the mom wants to protect her daughter from him in general. I don't know. Very interesting concept. The Afflicted is a 2010 film directed by Jason Stoddard, starring Leslie Easterbrook, Kane Hodder, and J.D. Hard. So I've actually seen this film. It's a lower budget film, and I believe it's based on a true story, maybe. It's about a mother who sort of goes down the line of extreme religion, and in trying to impose that, she becomes angry and violent towards her children, and it's very strange, but realistic. I personally, the lower budget did sort of take me out of the film a little bit, but I won't say it's a bad film. It wasn't my cup of tea. Buy Now, Die Later is a 2015 film directed by Randolph Longyaus, and it's an ensemble sort of cast. Not necessarily ensemble, but they're 5 interconnected stories. It's a Filipino film, and it stars Wong Navarro, Alex Gonzaga, and John Lapus. And of course, there's more people involved with the stories, but these are just sort of the main people. The film, again, is these interconnected stories that are all interconnected by the fact that these people went to this shop where they bought items that were supposed to sort of solve their problems, but of course for a price. These sort of almost like magical type of items. It's sort of like making a wish. You can make a wish for $100 and you could end up with $100, or you could end up like you mean $100, but you end up with 100 deer in your house, right? Sort of that situation where everything comes at a price, and so they may have the item that fixes their problems, but it causes some other unfortunate thing to happen. There are some sort of like comedic elements to this, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily a comedy. Demon is a 2015 film directed by Marcin Rona. It's a Polish movie, and it stars Ite Tiran and Agnieszka Zulewska. Also, rest in peace to the director. He took his own life, and this was the last film that he made before that. But the film follows a couple who is about to get married, and the groom ends up becoming sort of possessed by a spirit, and it haunts over the wedding. And this one specifically is a Jewish horror story. The possession is supposed to be reminiscent of the Jewish debut. But I always find Jewish horror to be very interesting because I think a lot of people harp on the fact that specifically Catholic horror tends to be where people lean towards when it comes to religious horror. And I think that there's a lot of horror to be explored outside of Catholicism. Like, as scary as it is in real life, there are other things that are much scarier that I think could be explored on screen. So... Emily or Amelie is a 2015 film directed by Michael Thalin and stars Sarah Bolger. So I've seen this film. This came off as a very Lifetime-esque film. It's about a woman who she is nannying or babysitting these two children for an evening, and she starts to do some stuff that's, very clearly questionable and unethical. Like, she does some stuff that's, like, unacceptable by every standard, but also there's, like, this underlying story of, like, why she's there and why she's doing this. And if you like sort of a, like, big reveal at the end, then, like, this might be for you. Like, if you I don't know. This again wasn't my cup of tea. I usually love a little Lifetime movie, but and I did like it in a Lifetime frame of mind, but knowing that I was supposed to, like, take it seriously, I couldn't. Excision is a 2012 film directed by Richard Bates Jr., starring Anna Lynn McCord. I'm honestly surprised that this film was down this far because I feel like a lot of people have actually talked about this film. I feel like I've seen a lot of people talk about this film. It follows a young woman who wants to go into medicine, but she kind of takes her obsession with cutting into things a little too far, and a lot of it has to do with trying to please and live up to her mother's standards. This film has, I think, mainly been talked about because of its, like, goriness, because of its relationship with, like, blood and cutting and things like that can be kind of, like, triggering for people, as well as sort of its relationship to sexuality and things like that, because there is sort of that. She is a teenager and she does, like, go to high school and things like that, so I don't know if I'll ever watch this film, but it does look good. Just from the trailer, it does look good. And it's sort of somewhere in between, in my opinion. It looks good for looking like a lower budget film, but not super low budget. Friend Request or Unfriended is a 2016 film directed by Simon Verhoeven and starring Alicia Debnam Carey. So I've talked about this film as well. I had watched it a couple of months ago, and again, not sure why it's down this far on the Iceberg, because I remember seeing advertising for this movie all over the place. I just remember being so scared when they showed that, like, a little face, those eyes or whatever. When it came out, I was freaked out, okay? So I am surprised that it's down this far. If you're unaware, this film it follows a girl who is very popular, popular on social media, and she's in college, and she ends up befriending this girl who has more of a dark presence to her. Either way, when she befriends her, more so when the girl tries to befriend her, as interested as our main girl tries to be in this sort of emo goth type of girl, she finds that after the emo goth girl takes her own life on camera, that she's now being haunted by her through social media, and that her social media has kind of been taken over by that presence, and she starts to, lose all of her friends, etc. Geki Janzo is a 2014 film directed by Mari Asato and starring Ayami Nakajo and Aoi Morikawa. It's a Japanese film, and it is based on a video game, and it also goes by, or is translated to, Fatal Frame. The film follows a group of girls at an all-girls school as they sort of try to uncover the mystery behind this photograph that they find. And honestly, this is like classic Japanese scary horror. Like, very much reminds me of a lot of other sort of Japanese horror that I have seen or heard about. It kind of reminds me of, what is that show? I watched it a long time ago. But it kind of reminds me of the show Another. I think, of course, it's also a manga, but that show where they're like trying to uncover the mystery and like kids are disappearing kind of thing. So if you're like into that and you want to see a live action, then like I'd recommend. Koko di Kokoda is a 2019 film directed by Johannes Nyholm and stars Leif Edlund, Ylva Gallon, and Katarina Jacobsen. And if you have been waiting for a long time to hear about a surrealist type of fantasy psychological horror, this is finally it. It's about a couple who decide to go camping in the woods after they've lost their daughter, and in doing this, they sort of end up in this weird time loop sort of situation where this like creepy, almost, I won't say circus, but like if you remember those like older sort of like sideshow type of carnival type of things, there's a lot of things in relationship to their daughter and the sort of loss that they're facing, along with this just terrifying slapstick humor that's trying to, humiliate them in the wake of their sadness. Yeah, this film definitely looks interesting, and of course I love like a good time loop, especially when there is like surrealist imagery and just fantasy elements overall, and it just being like sort of terrifying. The Nightmare is a 2015 film directed by Akim Bornhak and stars Carolyn Genskow and Sina Koch. It's a German film. The title and themes were inspired by a Henry Fuseli painting called The Nightmare, and even though it's sort of like unrelated, it's inspired, but it's not necessarily related specifically to the painting, i.e. it's like not based on the painting. It's just like the title and the themes were inspired by it, but essentially it follows this teenage girl as she like goes out partying, and as she's partying she ends up forming a bond with this monster type thing, and she kind of just like descends into madness. Tank 432 is a 2015 film directed by Nick Gillespie and stars Rupert Evans, Steve Gary, and Deirdre Mullins. It's a UK film, and it is about a sort of group of, they're sort of portrayed as mercenaries, but like they have kind of a military type vibe, but they're trying to move a hostage and a survivor across the battlefield. But when they try to do this, they sort of encounter this like unseen assailant, and in that they have to take refuge in a quote unquote tank. Apparently it's not actually a tank, but needless to say, they are taking refuge in there, and things sort of, go awry. I'm not usually one for films like this, but this film definitely seems interesting to me. And the final film on Tier 9 is Wolves at the Door. It's a 2016 film directed by John R. Leonetti and stars Katie Cassidy, Elizabeth Henstridge, Adam Campbell, and Miles Fisher. So the film follows a group of friends who are stalked and like harassed and just sort of like sadistically played with by these strangers, these intruders. And this film is interesting because it's sort of related to the Conjuring universe, even though it's not a part of it. You also have Eric Layden, who is coming back as Detective Clarkin from the film Annabelle. So it's like, it's sort of related to the Conjuring universe, along with being loosely based on the murder of Sharon Tate, who is the wife of Roman Polanski. And if you know anything about Roman Polanski, you know, not a good dude. Ain't nobody like him. But Sharon Tate and her friends were actually murdered by the Manson family. So it sort of has that inspiration there, but it's not like directly a like recreation of that in any sense, and it's also not a part of the Conjuring universe, but it like has sort of a relationship to it. So it's very interesting. And if you're into the type of movies where, you know, people are being like sort of stalked and hunted in their own homes, so they're having to like hide around, things like that, then like this, you know, this film would definitely be up there. Definitely like an interesting concept for a film, especially I really like films that are like inspired by things, but not necessarily just like a literal trying to be like a fictional retelling. Like at some point on the podcast, I will hopefully talk about like movies that are about like actual serial killers and stuff, and just sort of both the ethics around that, but also just ones that are like actually good, which I think are generally the ones that are like inspired by, instead of literally just trying to be a recreation of whatever happened. But that's a conversation for a different time. But either way, that is the final one for this tier. There's one more tier, and I'm sure some of you out there are like, just do the tier already, okay? I will, okay? It just takes time, okay? But of course, all of like the links will be in the description, whether you want to see like the full list on Letterboxd, because I do have a Letterboxd list that has almost all of the films. Some of them I couldn't find, but has almost all of the films on it. Or if you want to see the original Iceberg, I will also link that down below as well, because I think that's important to give credit to the original person who created the Iceberg, because I know some people are like, I don't like that you did this, or you haven't seen the film, so why are you even talking about them? I'm exploring this in the same capacity as you. I'm hearing about a lot of these films for the first time and doing a little bit of research to see what they're about, to see what's going on. And so this is what I like to do in my free time. So if you want to like go along for that ride, then like that's what I'm here for. Either way, I will make no promises about when I will be back, but hopefully this will tide you over for a little bit, and I will hopefully have another podcast episode out at some point, and then we'll get into tier 10, and then I will put all of it together so that you can have however many hours long this will probably end up being. But that is all I have for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in my next one.